There's something very nice about being invited to come and keynote your own PhD conference. It's a nice, very nice ego stroke. So maybe 5, 6 years, you could be here, maybe. All right, so I'm a qualitative researcher, and anyone who's spent more than about 5, 10 minutes around me will know that I quite happily get on my soapbox about it quite a lot, and so it's part of what this talk is about. So, quantitative research is great, and measuring things accurately is fine, but how do you decide what to measure? And even if you know what's a useful measure, is it even measurable? Often those are very difficult questions to get to if you want to do quantitative research. Maybe you're in an area where very little work has been done already. You're trying to find your way. We often try and move into an area by bouncing off things that are proximal or adjacent to it, but maybe that's not just there. And this isn't just academic, this is industry as well. Maybe you're trying to solve a game dev problem or a tech problem that no one's really had a crack at before. So, where do you get started? Or sometimes you're looking for a new audience, for a new product. Or rather than a new audience on a new product, you want a new spin on an old product, maybe. Or sometimes you just know that there is something going on over here, and your gut sense says there's something going on here that's interesting, and you want to know more about it. You want to clarify and understand and do something with that understanding. Well, if any of that resonates, then qualitative research could be for you, and particularly, I would like to say, grounded theory methodology. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about how qualitative and quantitative relate to each other, what actually is grounded theory, how is it useful, how does it really work, how have I used it, and kind of contextualize it a little bit in its utility and its power. Leave you some potential issues about GTM, and I've got some pointers towards further sources if you're interested in finding out more at the end of the talk. But before that, it's the most boring part of any talk. It's the bit about me. Okay, so who am I? How have I come to be here? So if anyone's at Develop, then this was the last session of Develop, where I was asked to participate in a game of charades in front of about 300 developers. And at this point, I was trying to convey the game Stray, I believe, by pretending to be a cat. So my background, I've had a fairly circuitous route into where I am now. I actually did my bachelor's in biology with industrial experience, specialised in virus replication. I kind of did several things really, as you tend to after you've graduated sometimes, and I fell into teaching. So I was a high school teacher, and I thought, well, this is rubbish. And so I went and did an MA in games design. It took me quite a long time to realise it was rubbish, but I did in the end. Saw the light. So I went to do an MA in games design at Brunel University, and after that I ended up working at Supermassive Games. I was a designer on Until Dawn, and I was an artist on Killzone Shadowfall, which we were contracting for Guerrilla at the time. I was between roles at this time, and I found out, these people want to fund your PhD. They want to pay you to become a doctor of video games. So I did that. So I started my PhD at Goldsmiths. Like Larissa said, I took a break to set up my own games design course at UCA. But after a few years there, I decided to return to Goldsmiths and finish my PhD. And then, where am I up to? Yeah. And then now I'm at Greenwich. So I'm a qualitative HCI and sort of game studies-ish type person. I published in Chi, I've also published in Games and Culture and DIGRA. So I do sit on both sides of that divide. And my specialism, my shtick, as it were, is mixed effect, or what I've called eudaimonic gameplay experiences. So my whole research is kind of generated by this question. You've got games like Call of Duty, Gears of War, GTA, those kind of core, FIFA, etc., those kind of core gamer type games. On the other side, another group, you've got Papers, Please, Dear Esther, Journey, those kind of things. Now, we know that those two groups of games are different. We know they have a very different emotional experience. But how are they different? What is it that actually defines them? Because it's not to do with indie versus AAA. Journey's not an indie game. It's not to do with any particular mechanics, possibly. But what is it? We know there is a difference until we actually have to try to describe it. So that's what I'm interested in. And then, aside from all that, I also run a conference called Adventure X, Narrative Video Games Convention, which bizarrely, after 10 years, is still the only event of its type in the world, which I find inexplicable. If anyone wants to start a narrative games convention, there's plenty of love to go around, please. It's not competition, there's lots of love, but I run that. For those of you who are wondering, we are close to finding a venue, and we've had a few issues there recently. And come and ask me afterwards if you're interested. So yeah, that runs in early November. Tickets will go on sale soon. They do sell out fast, so if you're interested, be ready. So qualitative versus quantitative research. So like I said at the beginning, quantitative is great if you know what you're going to measure and how, but sometimes it's difficult to actually work out what that is. Yeah, and quite often people start a quantitative study by taking a theory, especially if you're in an area where a lot hasn't been done. You'll go take a theory from either an adjacent or kind of proximal area and import it into where you are, which is fine sometimes, but it's not always like really the most useful way to go about things or to start your research, I don't think. And this is a thing for industry as well. It's not just academia, you're looking for a new area or an understanding. And also sometimes you just don't need to jump through all the hoops to get the quantitative proof. Now, that's touched upon actually in the panel earlier that, if you're in industry, it's like we don't feel the need to have to like make it super tight and rigorous. It's just like, if it's good enough for us, we're happy to run with it, in terms of what we've understood and what we've learned. So often we sort of conceptualize, a lot of people go into research and they think the only way to do research is like this. You start with your theory, generate your hypothesis, you've got your observation, you need confirmation. Okay, that's great, that's fine. Yeah, and we obviously refer to this the deductive way of working. Pause for caffeination. But the problem is how do you get to that theory bit? Like, where does that theory come from? Where's your start point going to be? It's not always really that clear. And is investigating that theory really going to get you the answers that you're interested in what you're focusing on? So what I'd like to say is, some people do know this, but a lot of people don't, not enough people consider the other side there, which is the inductive approach. So you start from an observation, you sort of make a load of observations, I think there's a pattern going on here, and you work that up into a hypothesis, and you test it more, and you've got a theory, great. And that's obviously the inductive side. So the extra question to ask is, sometimes, where am I going? Sorry, that's where we are. Do you even need that confirmation? There's always an assumption. Do you need to actually go down the deductive side and get all the hardcore numbers and quantify something? Is that always necessary? Or is just finding a new novel theory, new understanding, enough to be getting on with? Whether you're in academia or industry. So that's qualitative versus quantitative, but what is grounded theory methodology? There's lots of qualitative methodologies out there. I specialise in grounded theory. So the origins of grounded theory come from the area of social sciences. So there's these two chaps here. So the top one is Anselm Strauss. The bottom one is Barney Glaser. They are both dead now, unfortunately. Anselm Strauss, he died ages ago. But Barney Glaser actually kept going. And he was like 92 or something when he died 1 or 2 years ago. So he's only very recent. So they both arose from social sciences. And these two people, so Barney Glaser was Anselm Strauss's PhD student. And they wrote a monograph on palliative care in hospitals in California. So, and they called it awareness of dying, which is kind of their core concept, their core idea behind it. People's relationships with each other, how they acted, etc., was based upon how aware of the kind of sense of impending death they were. So they created grounded theory methodology in order to do this research work. And it kind of went sort of mushroomed and went on from there. Now they created this work. They did this research work and they created grounded theory, or the beginnings of grounded theory, in an environment that was very much quantitative research is king, and qualitative research, we don't really care about qualitative research. And this was social sciences in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And quantitative was king. And there was a lot, at the same time, there's a lot of importing of big grand theories. So a lot of the social sciences work at that time was, it's got to be about numbers, it's got to be measured, otherwise it doesn't mean a damn thing. And or it's about importing big theories like psychoanalytic theory, which was obviously de rigueur at the time, Marxist theory, things like that. And Glaser and Anselm Strauss sort of like railed a bit against this, said, but what about, maybe that's not actually very useful. What about our own theories about our own phenomena that we understand as social scientists? What about our ideas rather than trying to sort of validate someone else's completely unrelated ideas? So this was the the way in which it was founded, and that's where it comes from. I think that explains quite a lot about how it works. So what actually is GTM? Grounded theory methodology, it's a bit like Agile, except it's for generating theory instead of code. And I feel reasonably secure talking about Agile to a computer techie audience here. We all know what Agile is, I think. It's a safe assumption to make. And I'll illustrate this in a second. So just for the purposes of saying, what is a theory then? Theory is just a useful lens for looking at the world. It's not fact, it's not truth, it's just, is it useful for looking at a phenomena, for looking at something, for understanding something? So some of you are going to bristle at this. I understand it's a very simplistic, you might say incorrect, way of representing Agile. But for my purposes here, it's enough. So, I say we all know Agile. You plan something, you implement it, and then you sort of have a look at it, you test it, and then you plan the next bit, and you go around that loop many, many, many times. Iterative development, you might end up in a very different place to where you initially, you start off in the direction, but then obviously Agile, you pivot, and you sort of think, well, sod that direction, that's not going to work, and then you sort of pivot, etc., through these iterative cycles. Well, grounded theory is pretty similar in that respect. In grounded theory, you go in and you collect just a little bit of data. Now, it doesn't have to be interviews, although it very commonly is. Actually, my first grounded theory study was written games reviews, harvested from Metacritic. But often it is interviews, but you collect your data, can be words, can be numbers, can be any kind of data, but it is often words or transcripts of an interview. You just do 1 or 2 interviews, and then you analyse those. We analyse those by using some tools called coding and memoing. Basically what happens, you read like 1 or 2 lines of a transcript, say, and you think, what is actually really going on in these 2 lines? So someone's saying, oh, I felt really frustrated, so you might just like code up, say, well, in this line, this person's talking about frustration, okay? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to basically break up the transcript into like slightly more abstract chunks. You can then sort of like start and push and pull those chunks around and see how they interrelate to each other. So you're doing that coding thing to dig and abstract away from what's going on, to really dig what's actually really going on behind these words. Often you're coding up for what's not said, as well as what is said as well. And then you write memos, and memos is just a fancy term for saying the thoughts as they occur to your mind, your little thoughts and musings as you come to them. You write all those down in little entries, and then what you do is you start developing a theory. You look at how these codes relate to each other. You look at how different codes relate to other codes. You look at how some codes might be more important than others. Perhaps they have more explanatory power than others. They sort of illuminate a bit more what's going on. And you also compare the categories, the codes, with your memos as well. And as soon as you possibly can, in the same way that you want to generate a testable product with Agile, you develop a theory. And then that theory determines how you go back into collecting your next set of data, and then you start the process again. And you've got more codes, more categories, and you compare your codes and categories and memos between your early stages, your mid stages, your later stages. You're comparing it all with each other all the time. So it's quite in-depth, but you can see there's this iterative thing. And what you're doing is you're testing the theory to see how strong it is. And at some point you might even junk it because you think, well, this theory doesn't work. So in the same way that you do with Agile and code. So it's iterative, it's flexible, and it's for theory generation. But a lot of people think that because it's iterative, because it's flexible, it doesn't really have any rig and it's just like a bit waffly, but that's absolutely not true. It is still actually very rigorous, and this is the whole point of grounded theory. It's still very rigorous, and whilst it's not objective, it is still empirical. Your theory is grounded in the data, hence the name. You can see what they've done there. So it is empirical, and I find grounded theory is a nice halfway house between quantitative stuff where people designed an experiment and they said, blah, 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 here's my numbers, here's my statistic analysis, and to greater or less degree, like this is fact, this has been proven or disproven, etc. And then the other hand, you have, I don't know about you, but sometimes in the humanities, it feels a little bit like, I'm thinking of a thing, hark. Here is my theory, my idea. And they just kind of like pluck it out in the middle of the air, right? But grounded theory is kind of in the middle, because it's not objective, it's your interpretation. You couldn't possibly argue it's objective. There are some people who try to argue that. I could not agree with that viewpoint at all. But it is empirical. So it is this nice kind of halfway thing. The last thing I will say, though, is I'm glossing over about 50 years worth of very heated methodological debate here. And there are three main variations to be had. There's Glazerian or classic grounded theory, Straussian and constructivist. It could be argued there are more, but those are the three main ones. I'm going to give you some sources to go and look at all that stuff later on. I haven't got time to get into the weeds of that right here. So how is it useful? How have people used it? Well, there's a few industries in particular that are really keen on it, actually. Nursing and healthcare. It's kind of stuck to close to its roots, but in nursing and healthcare, from a business point of view, and I'm not talking about just academia, but from the industry point of view, they use grounded theory to try and work out what's going on in it with a new product, a new way of treating people, etc. Business management, you often find, if you Google for grounded theory, you'll find yourself looking at a business management or like a business management training website talking about grounded theory. And journalism tends to come up quite a lot as well, actually. So there's lots of these industries that do use grounded theory. And why do they use it? It's because the product is really useful. A good grounded theory has impact. It's got really good impact. A good grounded theory should be easy to understand without loads of explanation, and it should be like, oh yeah, I never thought of it like that. It's that kind of feeling. It should have what Barney Glaser calls grab. It gets you, you understand it, and it sort of illuminates something, and it's quite simple. You don't have to spend ages doing it. Shouldn't be too detailed, but it should be powerful. It gives you a novel understanding or knowledge of a domain, either of a new topic or, like I said before, a new angle on an old topic. So it's really useful stuff. If nothing else, grounded theory is actually a really good way, if there's nothing going on in an area, there's no other work for you to bounce off of. It's a great way to just march right into the middle of an area, plant your flag and go, right, there you go, come at me. There's my theory, there's my work, come at me. You don't have to sort of try and bounce off something that's proximal. So really effective, powerful way to do that. So other ways on how it works. So key points about grounded theory, and this is a difficult one a lot of people find. Note, you shouldn't really do a specific literature review before. You should leave your mind a bit more open for interpretation. If you do too much detailed literature review before you do the study, then it's just going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, yeah? And your ability to come up with a novel understanding is going to be greatly limited. And this is what Glaser again calls like forcing data. It's like forcing an understanding of the data, rather than allowing ideas to be constructed and emerge from the data. Because in a way, you're looking at a sea of data and hoping that something emerges out the mist. That's kind of the way of grounded theory. So you don't want to start with too strong a goal, a theory, or an idea. The only thing the thing that should be guiding you at all points is, what is the data telling me? And that's the question you have to be constantly asking yourself. What is the data telling me here? And that requires you to sort of like reflect upon yourself, reflect upon your own prejudices, reflect upon, all the things that could go into your interpretation. And try and be as open, as reflexive as possible. We know there's no perfect, none of us are a tabula rasa, we all know that. But it's trying to keep yourself as neutral as possible when you start. So yeah, remain open and reflexive, and what you're looking for is a theory, not a description. Now, I take particular issue with people that say, there is this kind of trend amongst some qualitative researchers to just say, oh, I did grounded theory, and they haven't done anything like it whatsoever. But it's like grounded theory is this magical qualitative pixie dust. And if I just say grounded theory, it makes it look good. It's like secret sauce. No. It's a rigorous theory that should be, it's a rigorous methodology that should be followed properly if you're going to do it properly. And if you just end up with a really detailed, long description, lots of taxonomy, that's fine. That's a description, though. It's not a theory. It doesn't mean it's worth any less, but you ain't done grounded theory is the point. So in practice, it's this interleaved data analysis and collection. It requires this coding, like I said, abstracting from the thing. The constant comparison, that's the codes with categories and memos, etc., doing that all the time. And you generate your theory early and revise it constantly. That's really important. And you sample to develop theory not for diversity. Now, so actually, one point I should have said at the beginning, the interleaved data collection analysis. So usually, for most of these studies, people collect their data, and then you do the analysis. What should be clear, as I've said from grounded theory, is it's absolutely not like that. It's a little bit data analysis, a little bit data analysis. And the reason you do that is because you're sampling to develop your theory, not for other diversity considerations. So you come out with a theory. Where you go and get your data next is what is going to test and challenge my theory? What's going to add to the theory? These kind of ideas that are ruminating, in my brain and over here to the side, what's going to help develop those ideas or deprecate them, and junk them possibly. So that's what you're sampling for. You can't do that if you've collected all your data and then you start analysis. Oh, I can't get any more data. I went and collected it all. Okay, so you have to do it iteratively. So yeah, like Agile, but for theory. I think that kind of makes sense. So how have I used it? All right, so the contextualization bit. So my research, so this is a little bit of story about my PhD. I spent the first 12 to 15 months of my PhD, and as Larissa said, I was one of the creaky old Mark I iGGi student models, the experimental guinea pigs of the piece. I think experimental guinea pigs means that we blew all the budget, actually. We were pretty good at spending the money, weren't we? It all became a lot tighter after our year passed on. So, yes. So I spent the first 12, 15 months of my PhD reading about mainly psychological theories of emotion, because I thought, okay, well, I'm interested, that question I said at the beginning, these games, those games, we know those are different. If I'm going to be talking about theories of emotion, I've got to, about emotion, I've got to understand what an emotion is, right? I found out that actually, after 12, 15 months, none of this was any use to me whatsoever. Sometimes you have to do the work to understand that that was all useless to you in your endeavour. And I, bizarrely, given that games are, now what, 120, 140 billion worldwide, emotions are things we all have. Emotions is why we play games. There's actually really little work done on emotions in video games, which is bizarre, but yet true. Certainly not as much as you think. So let's come back to 2014. It was 2014. And I was doing the iGGi research unit at York. Paul was teaching, I remember it well. So I was doing the iGGi research unit, and what we had to do, and I presume this might be similar still now, is we got sort of introduced to a bunch of research methods, and it was like pick one, or pick something, and you had to basically do a study and write a paper for the second week. Okay. The extra context you need to have at this point is that my wife had given birth 1 week before I started the PhD. So what I was going to do for study was quite heavily determined by what can I get started on the train on the way home to London. So I live in London. So what can I do whilst I'm on the train home to London? Doesn't require other people, so it's going to require less time. It's all on my own time, and I can just sit in my room and beat away at it next week. So I don't want to be bothering testing on people and getting people, can you test my wonky setup or whatever? That I couldn't be bothered with that. So, and of course, I wasn't going to have any time to code anything up or set up a study over the weekend, because I had to go back, because my daughter was 6 weeks old. So I had to go and support my wife, and obviously I wanted to see my 6-week-old daughter. So I wasn't going to have any time when I was back there, right? And she never bloody slept. So, and this we knew already. So I was definitely not going to have any time. So I did that. And so it wasn't, I didn't do it for ideological reasons. I did it purely for practical considerations. And this led, so I thought, I got something here. And actually later on I spun that up, and that became my kind of first paper of the PhD, as it were. I published another paper before that, but it wasn't kind of part of my core investigation. It was something else. On emotional and functional challenge. And this has had pretty good traction. It's had about 70 citations or something like that, which for a qualitative piece of work is pretty good. So things like AI, I've looked at your citation numbers, because they seem to have a conference every day of the week. Everyone has even if it's just 30, some of these AI citations, but they've had 300 citations in a weekend or something. So they're also very good papers, but also I think the numbers work slightly differently. So but I'm happy with about 70 citations of that, and I've had People base their whole PhDs off of that paper. For those who are doing emotions, it's nice to see some people going through the booklet that you're interested in emotions. You should go and look at Julia Bopp's thesis from Aalto University, very good. She bounced off of that. And then Elisa Meckler came and spoke about hers and Julia's work in 2017, I think it was, I want to say. I don't know if any of the head honchos would correct me. I think it's 2017. And I wasn't there because I was working at UCA, and apparently my face was all massive on the screen behind here. I didn't have my ego moment then. But I'm having my ego moment now, so it's fine. So my point is not to say how wonderful am I. My point is that it was powerful stuff. It shows the utility of the method. It shows the power and the originality of the method. I obviously struck a nerve here because I didn't need someone else's theory to explain what was going on. Someone else's theory and thinking wasn't going to help me. I'd spent 12, 15 months trying to do that. It wasn't useful. I needed my own understanding to come to it in a rigorous way. So this thing set the trajectory for my PhD and really my kind of research career afterwards as well, and that's what I'm going to be doing moving forward, certainly in part. And then after this, I sort of went back to re-examination of agency. Again, with grounded theory, you go with an open mind, so I wanted to investigate the idea of emotional challenge. I won't get into the details of all those things in my work right now, but I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards, as any academic is, to prepare yourself. That's what all academics are like, right? Ask them about their research. But you had to keep an open mind. And so I wanted to look at emotional challenge a bit more, but because grounded theory, reflective, flexible, what is the data telling me, I actually ended up talking about a re-examination of agency. And then most recently I did a paper at Chi on emotional exploration, which is a concept I use to sort of like, what is going on in the mind and heart of someone when they're playing these games with this kind of eudaimonic mixed effect experience. And this is also an analogy I use in various ways to help inform design and how we can design for these kind of games. So touching a little bit upon what the panel was saying earlier, if it's only, I think Suzanne asked the question, if the only people who hear about your work is other researchers and no one else, really cares about it, I'm tempted to say no, it does matter. So I think for me, it's important that, it's building towards something that's actually going to change the world. It's going to be useful. For me, I want something that's going to be useful and it's going to have great utility for designers and for people to think about and create different, more emotionally engaging games. But that's my personal opinion. Your mileage may vary. So potential and choose with grounded theory then. It's not all sweetness and light. It's not all glorious wonderlands. It can be pretty difficult to predict how long a grounded theory study can last for. Although it's obviously, as with many things, the imminent arrival of a conference paper deadline or the ending of your funding has a great ability to focus the mind and have a theory forthcoming. But it can be relatively difficult to know. So people say, how many studies should I do? So, how long is a piece of string? You don't know until you know, unfortunately. So it is a bit, it's not kind of strictly controlled like that. It is also very much misunderstood, and this is why I get a bit ranty about it at points, because the number of reviews I've had to read through where this plonker of a person doesn't know anything about grounded theory, and they say, I've never seen grounded theory done like this. Then no, you don't know what you're talking about, because you obviously don't know any sources or anything about grounded theory. I've been through that quite a lot. So it can be difficult to do, but it can also be very difficult to explain. It can be particularly difficult to write, because usually we're used to writing your introduction and your background literature, and then your methods, and then what we did, our results, and our analysis and discussion. The usual thing. That doesn't work if you've got this kind of back and forth, iterative, flowing thing with grounded theory, where your literature review comes at the end, but you're trying to stick that at the front. And this paper has to make sense, as a story to someone reading it, right? So it can be quite difficult to write up. It does have those problems, and it's really very often misinterpreted. Oh yeah, I was going to put a trigger warning at the beginning. There's going to be no graphs or charts or numbers in this presentation, but I'm glad to see there's a lot more qualitative work going on. Actually, looking at people's profiles, but people very often misinterpret grounded theory, there's a great tendency still within HCI to say, there's no graphs. Where's your statistical analysis? This is all woolly and rubbish. Get out of here. Okay. So you are going to have to fight that. It depends which conference. It depends exactly, luck of the draw. Reviews, peer reviews, just a crapshoot anyway, right? Are you going to get reviewer 2 or are you not? And you also have to be able to embrace ambiguity. This is a big sticking point for people. You have to be able to just believe in the process, trust in the process, because you don't really know that you're going to make it out that you're going to come up with a thing until you've actually made it to that theory. And that can be difficult to know how. Sometimes it can be impossible to know how close or how far away you are. You've progressed, or sometimes you feel like you haven't progressed, but actually at the back of your mind things are percolating. I tried to find the source of this quote, but I really couldn't find it. I did try. I think it's somewhere in Kathy Chalmers's Constructing Grounded Theory book where she's quoting someone else, but I couldn't find it, and I swear it's in there. But someone once described grounded theory is like dropping yourself into the middle of a forest with no map and trying to find your way out. You don't know where you're going, you don't know where the exit is, and you don't really know that you're going in the right direction until you're nearly there. All right? And it does feel like that. It does very much feel like that. And until you've done it a few times, like I have, it can be difficult to trust. It's like, am I wasting my time? Can I just go and do some numbers and statistics? I know what's going on there. I know what comes next. So you have to embrace ambiguity and be comfortable with just believing that they will work out. So in summary, you're coming back to the theme of research innovation in games. Qualitative is important. It's not just for pilot studies, okay? Lots of the time people do qualitative for pilot studies. It's not for pilot studies. It's good in and of itself. You can generate really powerful, strong, novel insight with things like grounded theory, amongst other things. But, I do grounded theory, so I'm talking about that. But if you are going to do that, though, please use it properly. Please use it properly. Don't just sprinkle the fairy dust, say, I did grounded theory, because a lot of time people say, oh, we did coding, and it's like grounded theory. That's a little bit like walking into your kitchen, getting some bicarbonate soda and vinegar, mixing it together, watching it fizz, go, I've done science. Okay, it doesn't really work like that. So use it properly. If you want some more details, I published another paper, this went in iGGi this year. So yeah, more than a bit of coding, ungrounded non-theory. This paper is part advocacy, like I've been talking about a bit, part rant, about sort of picking on various people actually, for various reasons, like picking on people on various papers about essentially how they've been doing it wrong. But most of it is a primer, and it's an explanation of the history, a little explanation of history, explanation of the major differences between the 3 major strands, and I've got an example, explain what all the core tenets are there, and what an example grounded theory paper, example grounded theory investigation might look like. They're not all the same, they're all going to be different, but I've got an example about how you might get started, how it might be visualized, in order to help people kind of get their heads around the process. And I'm available on email, on those 2 emails. One's a personal, the other one's my Greenwich one, and yeah, happy to take questions on that.